helping you with Acorn and RiscOS computing.
Well, first thing I shall do is to share my screen. If I can find... Right, so I was wanting to trace railway lines on a map and label them for a book, and this was 2009-ish. RiscOS is still quite a long way away, so I had to find a way of tracing out the lines so that I could plot them, and then finding something to plot them onto. So the first thing I did was, I don't know if this works, this. I'd found some map tiles in that have been produced by a company called mpemap.org, which have been created for the express purpose of people clicking on it and saying where their postcode was located. For copyright reasons, they use 1940s out of copyright OS maps that they'd scanned. They hadn't made a brilliant job of scanning them. So if I zoom in, there are 5 by 3 kilometers there. And if you look very carefully, you might be able to see that the grid lines can be visible in the top and the right, whereas they should be exactly aligned with the squares. But when they scanned them, they didn't quite get them quite right. So there's an error of about 100 meters built into everything that I did this way. But basically what it allows you to do is to click on the map, and it will trace out the line that you are following, as you can see there, dropping little blue circles to show where you've been, and writing the result into a browser window that it's opened with the grid reference of each click of the mouse. So as I click the mouse, you'll see it lays a trail of dots to wherever the mouse is, and writes the coordinates, the grid coordinates, to a window you can't see. I don't know if you can see it if I bring it in front of it. No, you can't, because it's not sharing it, of course. But it's writing it to a browser window, which I can show you. It's writing it to a browser window that looks like that. So what it's doing is it's building up a list of coordinates, which are in 1 meter coordinates on the grid system for each place where I click the mouse on the screen, knowing which maps it's displaying so it knows which grid reference it relates to. All a bit of clever JavaScript, but utterly irrelevant to the talk in its main thrust. So I will go back to sharing. Right, so I'm having to use that method because there's nothing else. I needed an old map so that the railway lines I wanted to trace were still visible. I've found the suitable map tiles for Britain. There was an article in Computer Shopper that showed how to draw lines in a browser window, something that doesn't work anymore. And a bit of JavaScript later. That is how it looked when I was using Internet Explorer 6 and 7 on Windows, where it all worked perfectly. And what would happen was I've clicked the mouse at position 1 and position 2, and then I've got the mouse at position 3, and it's drawn a red line to show where it would drop the blue dots if I click there, which I could move around until it looked nice, and then click, and then move and do the next one. All the time it was building up the result in a window which only just met all the security protocols that I was writing into as each mouse click took place. And the way I saved the route that I'd traced was to view source and then save it, which meant that became effectively a a text or CSV file recording all the mouse clicks I'd done. So if I move on to the next one, basically it was working out where the mouse was in terms of grid coordinates, written to another window, and it was all rather time consuming and horrible, hacky and what have you. That's what it produced, an adequate export format file for each line, which had all the grid coordinates in. So I was tracing lots and lots and lots of lines. The Anquet application on Windows would display 1-inch or 2.5-inch OS maps and allow its own proprietary format AEF files to be overlaid on it and shown. It wasn't very good at tracing a line though, because it wasn't really any good at that. Now I wanted to find something a lot less detailed on which I could plot these lines I'd traced that wasn't prominent enough to sort of take your attention away from the actual lines that I'd plotted. So I used my mother's 1930s school atlas, hoping that might be able to copyright, but I wasn't sure. And that showed the railways in the era that I wanted, so that was quite nice. I wrote a BBC programme and I plotted the lines. So scanning them, these less detailed maps was easy, and I got a sprite that was dead easy. But working out where a particular grid reference would fall on it was not quite impossible, but very difficult and quite inaccurate. There were a few lines of latitude and longitude on the scan map, which helped, because I could work out what the grid coordinates were at those particular points. And the way I did it was to guess the grid coordinates at the corner, interpolate, see whether it looked any good, and then keep guessing. It was 2009, so I'm still 5 years away from RiscOSM, but it produced something like that. There's lots of odd detail that I didn't really want because it was on the scan map that I'd used as background. The lines didn't line up precisely, not so much because I wasn't tracing them accurately. I certainly was, but if you look at the railway lines on the map, they've been drawn freehand. They're not actually in the place that they actually were. So whatever I plotted onto the map would never quite follow the lines on the map because they weren't in the right place. So here comes RiscOSM now. I could produce background maps in whatever scale I wanted. I knew exactly what the coordinates of each corner were because it would tell you that. I could export the map as a draw file, perfectly sort of sized for the page I was going to put it on, and but I didn't do that to start with. First thing I did was to use RiscOSM to produce a map at quite large scale that I could then cut up into 1 kilometre by 1 kilometre squares covering a particular grid reference. The application here was Ireland, where there was no other map tiles available. So I managed to produce 103,000 1 kilometre squares to cover Ireland so that I could trace lines in Ireland. So I with the screen at the same place on the with the window on the same place on the screen, and keep typing in different parameters for latitude and longitude, I could capture screenshots where the bit I wanted was at a specific point, the same place on each screen I'd saved. So I could then chop it all up and produce 1 kilometre square tiles. So I could trace lines in Ireland. Right. Now we come to where I start using RiscOSM. So I haven't wasted too much time on the background, but version 1.26 could do all of what I wanted. And in August 2015, I published the volume on Ireland, but still use the school atlas for background maps because I hadn't quite got to that point yet. In 2016, I got diverted from this task, and what I wanted to do at that time was to display a rolling map from a GPS device. So WIMP messages were added to RiscOSM that would take a message saying, "Hi, I'm over here," and display a rolling map to show where the GPS location was on a map. So what it meant was that I could send a message from my application SatNav to say, "Display me I'm here and heading north, display me I'm here and heading west," and it would show a little pointer on the map, and you could ask it to record the trace as well. So where do I go from here? I'd built a headless pie with a GPS module, and the principal use I had at the time was to use SatNav to get the information from the GPS module and record where I'd gone. I was inspired by a DigiWalker, I think it was called, PDA, which would do just that. Well, until it broke. And then, having recorded the journey from A to B, I could use RiscOSM to analyze it and display it and do all sorts of things with it. And if there was a monitor connected to this headless pie, it would have shown where I was going on a map at the time. So it only really became useful when the Pinebook Pro appeared, and I adjusted SatNav to talk to a USB connected GPS module. And I'll give you some examples. So if I click this, right, now I can, let me try and do the clever bit again. Yep, that's working. So what that's displaying is, in the small rectangular window with the big number, it's displaying what the OLED display on the headless pie was actually showing in the car, which was basically a speedo, but the actual position the car is in has been plotted onto a RiscOSM map, and the NMEA sentences that the GPS module is processing are rolling up the screen there to show, well, it was more debugging than anything. So what it's doing is it's showing my journey with the speeds, and then whenever I come to a stand, which I will do in a moment because that is where I parked, it will give more detail about my location. So it's about coming up there. So as the speed drops below 1 or 2 miles an hour, which it hasn't done, if you're just patient with this, it will get to where I want it to get to. It's an animated GIF, which is why I can't really influence it. So that took a bit of doing to put it all together, but you can see it's displaying the time of day and the speed, and only when the speed is down to about 1 or 2 miles an hour or stationary does it display any more detail, so it doesn't distract you while you're driving. It's quite handy to calibrate the speedo, actually. Coming up to a set of traffic lights, so I think I'm probably going to be stationary in a moment. Yeah, so you can see that it does a different display, including grid reference and various other things, when it's stationary. So let me go back to So let me show you what that trip looks like. Well, it's a different trip actually. Which I have to share separately again. Oh God, this is, yes, it's not as simple as I thought it would be. That's how RiscOS analyzes the journey. So if I then show you another share, that's better. Right. If I now open RiscOSM, right, and actually find where's that gone? Oh, that's a shame. Right, okay. That one. Right. If I now drop that log into RiscOSM, it's loaded up the journey that I'd recorded on, that you can see highlighted there, that I recorded. And if I open the pins and tracks window, and animate that track, which is tricky because I don't want to hide the map. So if I animate that track now, you'll see it is running along the track, and it's also displayed an analysis of the track there, giving the speed at any point, distance travelled and what have you, and it's 19th of May 2022, and so the journey I've recorded is now explained in great detail by RiscOSM. So if I come back to, I'm just wondering how wonderfully clever it will look when edited. So I've just done that. I've given the recorded journey as it would look on the Pi itself. I've animated a view of a route I'd previously recorded and analysed that same trip under RiscOSM. So back to railways. I decided to use RiscOSM to produce the background maps. I kind of knew what area each map should cover, and I knew how wide it had to be because it had to fit on an A4 page. But each map was trial and error. So now what I'm trying to do is to produce a map of Derby, Nottingham and Loughborough. So if if I produce a map of Derby at a fairly sort of small scale, and I say, right, I want to have Derby, Nottingham and Loughborough. So the map is 180 millimeters wide. So if it disappears off the bottom of the screen, but basically it's 180 millimeters by 220 millimeters. But I want Derby to Nottingham to occupy the right place on the map. So if I bring them up to where I want them and drop the zoom to 180,000, the map nicely sort of goes from Derby to Nottingham there, but it goes a lot further down than Loughborough, so I need to make the vertical height different. So I make the vertical height different, and of course it's chopped the top off rather than the bottom off. Well, it hasn't actually, it's done it where I want it. So I've actually now got the map Derby, Nottingham, after this faffing around, so I can export the map as a draw file, which I'm not going to do at the moment, but I could do. But I would have to remember all of the parameters I'd used to create it. And as I dragged it around a bit, if I do the information for the map, you can see that it's a horrible lot of decimal places of degrees in the centre of the map, and a scale, so that, and I need to record how tall. So I need to record it's 180 millimeters wide, 150 millimeters high. It's centered at that particular obscure latitude and longitude, and it's a scale of 180,000. I had to write all those down so that if I needed to, I could recreate the map. And actually getting the map to cover the area I wanted was a lot of faffing around. So if I come back to that one. Yep. So I had to drag the map to get the top bit right, change the zoom to get the width, coverage width right, get the bottom correct, and then export the map with coordinates explicitly printed in the map, so that when I'm working out where the corners are, I can actually read it from the draw file, because it's the heading of the map is the coverage. I'll show that in a moment. So that was the example. The map has to be 180 millimeters wide. It needed to cover Derby, Nottingham and Loughborough. I found the height of 150 millimeters was sufficient with a width of 180, but there's lots of interaction, dragging the map around and changing the zoom and changing the height, and then exporting the map. The information window tells me the latitude and longitude at various top. The left-hand edge is a constant longitude, as is the right-hand edge, and the top and the bottom are constant latitudes, and you can therefore work out the latitude and longitude just with a simple calculation. I'll say simple, just with a calculation. Longitude is linear, so that's easy. You can work out where on the draw file is a particular longitude quite easily. But the variation vertically is a horrendously complicated formula, but it does allow you to work out what the latitude is at any point on the draw file. The old maps only showed freehold impressions of railway lines, so I was doomed to failure using them anyway, because they didn't look very good. And if I calculate the position of each waypoint I'm going to plot on the map, rather than just interpolate a guess of what the coordinates were at each corner, that'll give me a lot better accuracy. So now the plotted line matches. Now, before RiscOS came along, you can see there that that's one of the maps I produced using BBC Basic and Make Draw and the scan of my mother's geography atlas, guessing roughly where the lines should run. And if you look carefully, you'll see that the lines don't quite line up with where the lines are shown on the map, because they showed the lines on the map in nice freehand depictions that weren't accurate. So, after RiscOSM, you'll find the lines now very, very closely follow the railway lines. You can see where one line joins another, that they're almost touching. So they're absolutely bang on now, and much clearer, more accurate. So, summing that up, I was using trial and error to get the coverage right, as you saw. I edited the style sheet to get nice soft pastel colours for things that were quite prominent on the original maps, like fields and forests and things, and a pale colour for railway lines, because I was going to plot the ones I was interested in, so I wanted the others not to obtrude. Export the map with coordinates. Wrote some basic to read the file, add the plotted lines, add the other detail, and produce a final draw file, and then converted to PDF using the PostScript Level 3 printer drivers, so it was suitable for commercial printing. Now we come to some really good bits. Version 1.4 allowed you to trace a line with it being constrained to follow a particular medium. I'll show you what I mean by that. Let's zoom in a bit. Now, if I say I want to trace a line, and I keep clicking until I get a steam engine symbol, and say, yes, I want to trace a route, and I click here. No, let's click somewhere where there's a railway line. Let's click there. Right. Now, can you see it's started picking up that line? And if I move the mouse is, let's go this way. The mouse is not exactly on the line, it's just somewhere on the screen, and it's finding its way to where it is on the screen using the shortest route that's actually joined up. So it looks rather horrible here because the line that used to join up there doesn't seem to exist. So oh no, there it goes, there. So you can see I'm tracing the line now along. If I click, you'll see it's followed the railway line without me having to try and follow it carefully. And you just move the mouse like that and it traces along the railway line, and then you can then export that tracing, and it's 10 times easier than trying to faff around with Internet Explorer and clicking accurately on the map, making sure you follow the curve carefully, and it's just doing it all for you. It's brilliant. And you can do that along roads or footpaths or cycleways or railways or whatever. And it's an extremely useful feature. And you can see it's just, you're able to just sort of move the mouse freehand and it will trace. If I start that again. If I start that again, you can see, I think this is a railway line. Yes, you can see it happily tracing the railway line all round the houses like that. And I'm not following it precisely with the mouse. I'm just, in fact, even if I'm quite a way away from the railway line, it's still constrained to follow the railway line. So it's really handy for tracing. It gets more, if I go into a much smaller scale, the problem now is that the scale is now so large that it displays the individual railway lines. So if I click on the down line, let me. If I click on the down line, I can move the mouse up like that. But if I then move to the other line, I don't know whether it will do it in this. No, I need to be bigger scale than that. Yes, can you see the lines are shown separately? So if I now try and click on the other line, it goes all the way back to the first crossover it can find, and then comes all the way back to where I am. So if you trace the lines at too large a scale, you can find yourself actually following the physical railway lines. Right, let me come back to where I'm happier. Yeah, right. So long as the map showed the railway line I wanted to trace, it was fine. If it had been obliterated by building work and wasn't on the map anymore, obviously it wouldn't work. And in fact, defunct railway lines would allow you to trace along them until you got to a missing bridge. Then you had to manually jump across. What RiscOSM would produce once you trace the line was a GPX file. And I could convert them using multitask into an AEF file, i.e. converting latitude and longitude to grid coordinates. Let me stop briefly at this point and say, does anyone have any pressing comments at this point?
There was one comment in the chat a bit earlier.
Yes, I haven't been looking at that, I'm afraid. Let me have a look at it. Oh God, how do I do this? Right.
The chat somewhere down the bottom of your screen.
Yes, but not while I'm displaying PowerPoint. Oh, all right. I've accidentally closed the window. That's annoying. Right. Okay. Let me have a look at the chat. Yes. Oh, that. Yeah. Well, I'd done exactly the same thing, but I used Anquit mapping software, which could do most of those things. I bought all the 50,000 and 20,000 maps for the whole of Britain, which cost about several hundred quid. And so I simply wasn't in the market, Vince, for looking for yet another different bit of mapping software, because what I found was that after a year or two, they'd updated it, and then you couldn't use all the stuff you used on the previous version. So I had to stop using the Anquit mapping software because they'd completely changed their user interface, and it didn't do some of the things I needed anymore.
The thing about Fugawi is it still works now. The only thing which doesn't work on it, obviously, is the link to a Windows mobile device with GPS on it, because they sort of no longer exist.
Yes, well, that was the other reason for using Anquit, was that it linked up to the DigiWalker, and it meant I could easily trace routes on it and transfer them across and everything.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I used to do with Fugawi when I was off-roading.
Yeah. But the problem was that Anquit updated their software so that all the old maps wouldn't work anymore, and you had to buy them again. And I simply wasn't interested in spending a lump of money all over again for something I'd already got. and so I moved away from it, and very fortunately, I was able to persuade the authors of RiscOSM to import AEF files in the same way that it imports GPX and KML files. So I could import them into RiscOSM and display them. So all the tracing I'd done wasn't going to be wasted because it was a proprietary format. Right, let me go back to sharing. Right. Sorry, I'm back to where I was again. So although RiscOSM would import AEF files, it would only output them as GPX files, but that was fine. So, other developments. Things were changing quite rapidly in 2016, 17, 18. And in August 2017, the National Library for Scotland completed 3 years' work of scanning 89,000 25-inch OS maps of Britain. Now, 25-inch maps are a colossal scale compared to the 1-inch maps. So each map covers a tiny area, but in fantastic detail. They'd added tools to drop pins to mark a place and trace lines and export the result as a KML file. RiscOSM could input it and you could export them. So I could end up with AEF files from lines that were only shown on maps that had been produced in the 1880s or 1900s or 1920s. So vastly greater resolution, rather more tedious, but lines that I couldn't find on any current map were of course shown as being current at the time, so I could trace a lot more lines. Bearing in mind now that producing the map involved a lot of interaction, I made a feature request to Sine Nomine. Could RiscOSM accept a message to say, please make me a map this wide, this high of this place? Left-hand edge here, right-hand edge here, etc. And now I could ask for a map covering a specific area with a particular style sheet. So let me demonstrate that. Where are we? Right, so if I now we have an application here called OpenMap. If I show you first of all, oh no, if I press Shift, right, I will cheat. It is a feature of multitask. I don't think I can hold Shift down and double click on Open a Map to open the directory viewer, so I'll cheat and drag it onto multitask, which will then open the directory as if you'd held Shift down. So it's a very simple multitasking app with yes, the key part of it is further down. Let me find it. All procedures for drawing menus and such like. You'll see in the procedure menu select that if you're selecting item 1, it does that. If you're selecting item 2, it does that. If you're selecting item, I don't know if you can see the mouse, you probably can't. The mouse pointer. Can you see the mouse pointer? Difficult for me to tell, really. Anyway.
Yes, you can.
Right, so you'll see there's a procedure that says proc gen map with bottom left grid coordinates and top right grid coordinates and a name, which is what it uses. That procedure there, proc gen map, works out the draw coordinates for the top, bottom, left and right of the map I want to produce, and sends this message here, geodata open map, to RiscOSM. Says this is the latitude at the left, latitude at the bottom, longitude at the left, longitude at the right, latitude at the top. I want it this wide, 180 millimeters. I want it that high, which I've worked out from the ratio of the two sets of grid coordinates, and use that spreadsheet midrail 5, and send the message. It then, when it receives the message back here, what it does is it extracts the data that RiscOSM has added to say how big the draw file is and what the scale is and things like that, and outputs them in the form of data statements, and then raises an error block to say, now please save the map. So, just let you show you there the complexity of the conversion. You can see on the screen there the initialization for the conversion routine for both Britain and for Ireland, and the actual conversion is this horrible pile of arithmetic here, which eventually generates as you can see it's scrolling down, eventually generates a grid reference from the latitude and longitude that you put in by repeatedly calculating the other way and iterating. So what it does is it works out the grid reference from the approximate guess of the latitude and longitude that it starts off with, and then error corrects until that grid reference translates back into the proper latitude. Anyway, don't worry about it. That's the final result. Oh, sorry, that's a direct calculation. Sorry, that's a direct calculation which calculates the grid reference from latitude and longitude, and it goes through this complicated formula and produces the grid reference. And then I've written a routine that does it backwards, that takes the grid reference, keeps on working out the latitude and longitude from different guesses until it error corrects itself to the right figure within a meter. That is the rather strange formula which is used to work out the vertical variation of latitude. It's a horrible formula because the latitude itself isn't linear vertically, but that function is. And I'll show you it working. Let me show you it working, hoping that it does. RiscOSM is running. I will open a map with some trepidation. It creates an icon bar icon, and if I select from the menu section C, it will send the information to RiscOSM, bring up an error window and say, please save what RiscOSM is going to produce as section C. And lo and behold, there's the map of Derby, Nottingham and Loughborough, exactly positioned as I want it, with a style sheet that has fairly pastel backgrounds for the various railway lines and forests and roads and things that have all had their colours altered from the standard ones to make them less visible. I'll come out of RiscOSM and show you two things. It's produced this file here, which is an AER, not AER, that's something from work, AEF file. Why I've called them AER, I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't matter. That file there is just a list of coordinates at the corners of the map. So if I drop that onto RiscOSM, you'll see it's drawn just those corner. It's not quite right because I was a cock up, but don't worry about that. But what it's done is it's just drawn enough of so that if I want to say on one map where another map covers, I can drop this onto it and it will show it on the map. So you can see that defined by the lines is the edges of the Derby, Nottingham, Loughborough map I'd produced, created from scratch on a blank canvas so that it's bigger than the map I produced, so you can see the lines. Right. The other thing it produces is this, which are data statements for a basic program which says the approximate grid coordinates, the ones I used to say where I wanted the map to be, are as given, that as I sent to RiscOSM, so 429.400, 31728, etc. That's what I sent to RiscOSM. And what it's actually produced is a map with 1.565 degrees west on the left-hand border, 1.0876 degrees west on the right-hand edge, 52.75 degrees latitude at the bottom edge, and 52.986 degrees north latitude at the top edge. That's what it's actually produced. And it isn't exactly 180,000, it's 178,988, the scale that it's actually produced. The other two figures are the width and height of the file in draw units, which, if you remember, are 256 times 180 per inch, which should meet most people's needs. So what it's done is produced the map itself there, which is a draw file, which is for Derby, Nottingham, Loughborough. It's produced data statements so a file knows exactly what the coverage is of the draw file, which can be used. And it has, don't worry about the other files there because they're what I shall show you in a moment. Now, that was open a map. If I now, let me think, yes, if I now run this basic program here, this program, I will show you first. This program here has various bits and pieces in it. One of the things it has is those data statements which define, exactly as you saw earlier, which define the coverage of the mapping grid and in latitude and longitude and the scale and what have you for section A map, section B map, etc. It also says somewhere yes, it says here, for example, that I want a table of lines to appear 20 units from the left and 280 units from the bottom on the section A map. So I'm setting the origin to be that different place before I draw the table of lines. Each one has the table in a different place so it doesn't obscure detail. And then you have some lines that look like that, which basically say 129 units along this route, 129 waypoints along this route. I want to display a label. It's a route listed in section A. It's called MY001. And therefore, if you look for a file my001.aef, you'll find the waypoints for it, off you go, and they're all one after the other. So if I run it, which is the simple thing to do, let me think. I need 512 megabytes of WIMP space. Now, what it's doing is it's reading every traced line and putting it into memory in an array. All the waypoints of every line. It's saying which maps do I want to trace, and I'm saying I'm going to do all three. So I'll start at number 1, and it's now going through, plotting those lines on the map, importing the map that RiscOSM produced, plotting the lines, labeling them, working out which lines are on the map, and interpolating the ones that go outside the bounds of the map to see where they hit the edge, and only plotting the bits that should be on the map itself. And you can see it's taking a little while doing the final one, but the hourglass is counting up 40%, 50%, 70%, 80%, 90%, and it's done. Now, what it's produced, one of the maps it's produced is that one. Which is a PDF of the cover for the book, which is slightly bigger than A3, with a map on the back showing the coverage of the book. The front of the cover shows its title, a couple of photographs and what it is, and then the text on the spine is, of course, sideways in the British way round rather than the American way round. And all of that lines up precisely with where the spine would appear on the cover, given the number of pages that the book has. So, if I come out of that, and it's also produced this map here of the Wirral area with the railway lines plotted onto it. It imported the map, you saw the map that RiscOSM produced, which had just railway lines in pale red and place names depending on the scale, and it's overlaid on top of that the railway lines that I've traced in the section that it's showing, which is red, plus all the lines from other sections in the colours of those sections, plus labels on each line at the point I've suggested, that many units along the line, and it's given the page a page number. So this is page 139 in the book, and that is the draw file that would be the PDF for that page in the book. You can see there's an overlay, a more detailed map available of the area in the Wirral at a bigger scale, and that's shown with those dotted outlines there as to where it is on the map, and it says there, see page whatever it is for the detail in that area. So that was a practical example of RiscOSM and BASIC producing those coloured maps for that book. So if I now go back to the right, this is where I was. So I could now ask for a map covering a specific area, exactly the width I wanted, with a particular style. And a later version, now in September 2024, another feature request, allowed an exported map to contain within itself those parameters that have been used to create it in the first place. They were in hidden draw objects, and dragging the map onto RiscOSM would cause it to be regenerated using the latest data. It would also, let me think carefully how I put this. If you have particular features that you want to highlight on a map, you can import the information into RiscOSM from a CSV file and say, I want to highlight these particular locations, this signal box, that, whatever, and here's their grid references and what have you. RiscOSM will then put a circular pin with a number to say that's that location. But it won't actually say any more than that. We'll just put the pin on the map. If you then generate the map you generate will have all those pins in it as well. So if you load this extra information to RiscOSM before creating the map, then it will have all those pins in. So now let me go back to RiscOSM. Ho, ho, ho. So if I deliberately choose a tiny little map that has next to nothing on it, and I drag that map B if I drag that onto RiscOSM, it will say this map is this wide, this high, and covers this area. It will then generate that map. That, you see, is now the map that was generated. It's not, because I've moved it, but I don't know how I did that. Let me try that again. Section B, or was it section A? No, it was section A I wanted. Right, that was the map you saw, and it has this, if I go into RiscOSM and look at the tracks window, and I say, right, let's get rid of all those pins and tracks. And now I recreate that map. Well, that didn't work, did it? Ah, yes, okay. Right, okay, so if I export that map without the pins and tracks, and then where did it go? I thought I'd say that's not it. Where did it go? I thought I'd saved it to where I thought I was saving it. Obviously not. Let me do that again. So I'm loading the section A map in. I'm now saying let's delete all of the tracks, re-export the map, without them, now I've got it there. So now if I load that into RiscOSM, it will create the map, but there's no box on it. If I you'll have to trust me for this a little bit, but if I load this into RiscOSM, that's the one with those if I zoom right in so there's nothing there, if I zoom back out again, you'll see that those lines are still there because they're stored in RiscOSM. So if I now say, please recreate this map that didn't have the tracks in, because those tracks are still in RiscOSM, it produces it with them in. So if I try and explain what I mean by that. Hey do 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 dee do dee do. Right. If I put lots of detail into RiscOSM first, perhaps a CSV file that shows particular boxes, etc., and then either drag the map onto RiscOSM that is the area I want, or use OpenAMap to open the map of the area that I want, it will open with all those bits I'd already put in previously, all included on that map, which I can then export again, which would now have all those bits in it. So it allows me to create the map, to decide to add lots of things to it, and then recreate it, and all those lots of things will be built into it. So, hoping that you understand where I'm getting to. I've done an example of map creation using OpenAMap. It tells it to create the map, it replies, and the information is saved for later, and as I've shown you, and the map is exported as a draw file if you follow the instructions. So if I add location pins before creating the map, create the map, it'll have those pins on then. Having exported it and then using basic and make draw to plot the line, each map is used in turn to create a page. Any extra symbols and text are also added, and I showed you the demonstration of how that worked. So there's some information available online. The notes of this talk I've written up as an 8-page PDF. There's a ridiculously detailed description of how I produce the books online. And there's an article about things that RiscOS can do online, and the application OpenAMap is available online as well at those places. That is the article, and if I'll show you one page of it. That's an illustration of what I produced in 2015, and you can see that the lines are wildly inaccurate at the edges, because that blue line should follow that railway line there rather than be in the middle of the ocean. But that was a limitation of that method of guessing the grid coordinates and what have you. So if I stop sharing and come back to me, if there's any questions, please fire away.
The usual stunned silence.
Yes.
Unmute yourselves if you want to say anything.
I'm sorry it was a bit detailed, but
Interested in that bit about the Wirral, because my mother was from the Wirral, but I've already plotted out sometime I intend to cycle the disused sections of railway line there, most of which are available for cycling and walking.
yeah, they've done a lot of conversion of old railway lines into footpaths. In my formative years, whenever we went anywhere in late 60s and early 70s, you could see the old railway lines in the countryside with a double line of fencing that the farmers hadn't yet stolen. Another 10 years later, and the farmers had expanded their fields into where the railway line used to be. But then you could see the track of the railway very, very easily on any car journey because nothing had happened to it. Because in those days, no one changed things just at the drop of a hat. Yes, and they've gradually disappeared, of course, over the years as people have built on them and what have you.
It's not Richard Beeching we should go back in time and shoot. It's Ernie Marples.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there was more closed in the 1970s, you know, when railway traffic had fallen right off and the service on lines that were still open was sort of really, really sparse. A lot of lines got singled and cut down to suit the current timetable. And of course, when they wanted to put more trains on, the line couldn't take any more trains because it was all single track. So that happened particularly from Salisbury to Exeter, because it was a line that used to belong to the Southern Railway that was transferred to the Western region, and the first thing they did was decimate it because they'd fought it for so long in the past that the first thing they wanted to do with it was to try and close it. Yeah, that happened a lot. So
a lot of the line closures in this part of the world are nothing to do with beaching, really. It's because there were mineral lines.
Right.
Thankfully, a lot of those are still available for us to walk or cycle, which is nice.
When you lose track of them, sometimes you can re-find them by looking at walls, which were often made of the famous blue engineering brick still. And so suddenly you'd be driving along and there's this unusually matched wall either side. And you think, there was a railway.
You can see just such a thing in Hall Green, just up the road from it.
That's what I was thinking of, exactly. Yes.
And one of the things that we've learned is that when they decide to demolish a structure that was built back then, they realised how well built and strong it was when they try and demolish it, because they used blue brick, which is very, very strong, and they did the job properly, not like today. Mainly because they didn't really have enough knowledge to be sure that what they were doing would be enough, so they overdid it. And the structures that they built were incredibly strong. In with one or two exceptions where they really did get it badly wrong, but generally speaking, they were pretty strong. And when they come to demolish them now, they think, oh my God. I do remember that Bradwell Power Station was built on the site of a World War II aerodrome, and the runway concrete was shot concrete, which was incredibly strong. They brought in, when the power station was being decommissioned, they brought in a contractor, and he quoted for breaking up this concrete, and he nearly went bust over it because it was about 100 times stronger and deeper than he had ever possibly envisaged. Yes, even up until the 50s, we built things to last.
Not only strong, though, but actually aesthetic. I mean, brickwork and stonework that was never really going to be seen by people whizzing past on trains or even coal trucks. And yeah, they're really nicely detailed.
Absolutely, yes.
Anything's proper in them nowadays.
Yes.
Thankfully, nobody's ever heard, everyone's heard of HS2. Hardly anyone, even in this area, has heard of TRU. Have you heard of TRU?
No, but HS2 we've heard of because of the number of roads they've closed while they're doing the work.
TRU is Transpennine Route Upgrade on the railway, and it's the second biggest infrastructure in the UK, second to HS2, and nobody's ever heard of it. It's incredible. 4 tracking bits of railway that were 2 tracks, replacing umpteen bridges to allow room for overhead, the overhead line equipment for electrification, all kinds of. It's absolutely huge project, but it's very encouraging to see it.
It is. there are frustrations here. I mean, they built, they electrified the line from Paddington to South Wales, and didn't quite get as far as Bristol. I mean, they got to South Wales, but they only went to Cardiff, and they got halfway between Swindon and Bristol, and the money ran out. And so they then went and got trains that were what they call bi-mode, so they could run on the overhead until there wasn't any, then switch to diesel. So they've never bothered to electrify Bristol or Bath, but they have gone as far as Cardiff. And so all of the sort of economies, like where you'd say the whole line is electrified and we can run electric freight and everything, haven't been discovered because they cut corners, and mind you, the costs were going through the roof. But it seems to be the British way that you start off to produce a railway that meets this criterion, and then halfway in you say, well, we haven't got enough money to do that, so we'll do something that won't be very useful.
And the thing with TRU is, unusually, it's on time and on budget at the moment, which is incredible.
Well, HS2 was on time and on budget all the time they were lying, but as soon as they told the truth, it wasn't.
TRU's looking good, actually, unusually.
Yes, I don't think HS2 was managed terribly well.
Shock horror probe.
But the fundamental problem was that they had underestimated its cost, because they knew if they estimated the true cost, it wouldn't have been approved. So it was built in right from the word go.
It was probably also that the average speed they wanted was way too high, which made engineering much more complex and therefore much more expensive.
Yes, and completely the opposite happened on the Docklands Railway, where they decided it would be a cheaper railway that could accept sharper curves, and then they built it to have those sharp curves. And then when they said, actually, it's successful, we didn't expect that, can we do better? And we said, well, we've built it down to a price, and there's no way you can now, improve it because you've got all those sharp corners and such like. So, yes, it can work both ways. Yeah. But, yes, so...
Used to bi-mode trains in this part of the world because LNERs, I think they're all bi-mode. So when they get as far as Haymarket at Edinburgh, they have to switch to diesel to go further north. And also, some trains get to Leeds and go to either Bradford or to Harrogate, and they have to go on to diesel then.
Well, it seems to work, let's be fair. I mean, it means that they haven't had to electrify the whole line, because when they put HSTs on the line from St Pancras to Sheffield, they were planning to electrify the line, but the HSTs would run under diesel engines all the way from A to B. So, at least it's a bit better than that. But there isn't really a great deal of joined up thinking in government about railways.
It's very similar to where I am in my part of the world. Everything's diesel up until a certain point because they haven't electrified any of the railways around my area.
Where's that then?
Quite nice. On the East Coast, so I'm in Great Yarmouth. So anything along sort of that area, Cromer, Great Yarmouth, up to Norwich, it's all diesel.
Yeah.
LNER have ordered some tri-mode trains, so they'll run on battery as well. And I didn't quite get what the idea of batteries was, but apparently it's to use them like hybrids. So they use diesel and battery, so I guess they can accelerate quicker.
Yes, it does introduce more complication, but battery technology has improved so enormously that it's now feasible, whereas it probably wasn't feasible 10 years ago. But anyway, I hope from the talk you've seen how useful RiscOSM is and how versatile it is, because I've found it enormously helpful in doing quite customizable things with it.
Well, I need to apologise because I actually missed it, Chris, because I had internet connectivity issues trying to get on, and then I couldn't find the passcode. So I'd literally just got on it as you were finishing. But I'll wait for the video to go up and I'll rewatch it. But I'm sure it was wonderful.
How much
The internet not got to Great Yarmouth yet then?
No, I've actually got a 2 gig connection, but for some reason they're doing work on the exchange because it's the Easter bank holiday coming up, and they always do work at this time period. So I don't know what they're doing at the minute, but I think they're trying to upgrade us from 2 gig to 10 gig, which I don't know why we need 10 gig because none of our computers here can even support it, which is ridiculous. But yeah. It was down for about an hour and a half.
Well, I've still got 4G in Bristol. The coverage map shows that I'm just on the edge of decent coverage of 5G. So 5G is not even reached me yet. So I have a slightly cynical outlook on all these things that the politicians keep promising. Openreach have, however, offered to upgrade our block of flats to fibre broadband and did a survey, fibre to the premises, over a year ago, and have promised to do it for nothing, but are then almost uncontactable and have said, please don't keep ringing us. And
coming back to RiscOSM, Chris,
yep.
You mentioned a number of improvements over the years. How many of those, if any, were due to feedback from you personally?
Ah, right. Well, there are various elements of feedback. When they first made it able to plot grid lines, I did point out to them that there were two problems. One of them, they assumed the lines would be straight from one edge to the other, and actually they're a curve. B, they hadn't calculated them accurately enough. And at the time, they were using latitude and longitude expressed to 4 decimal places, which is simply nowhere near enough. You need at least 5. So they agreed to do latitude and longitude to 5 decimal places, and they did change the calculation of where the grid lines should actually be plotted, and so now they are properly curved and in the right place. So that was one thing I'd commented on. There were several things I commented on actually, but I can't remember what they all were now. But they were extremely grateful and cooperative in incorporating them.
They always seem to welcome feedback and advice.
Absolutely, yes. No, and it's an excellent product, and because you can talk to the programmers, you can find out how it works in detail internally. Like, for example, the formula for how latitude changes vertically up the map. And although the map displays itself as, let's say, 1 in 100,000, let's say, as the scale varies subtly from the top of to the bottom of the map. So that because you've got the left and right hand edge constant longitude, you can make the vertical scale approximately right by making the latitude vary according to, as the angle it is. But the top of the map and the bottom of the map cover different widths because they're constant lines of longitude. So however you slice it, the map cannot have a constant scale roll the way across it. Which is why the Ordnance Survey used the grid system to generate their maps so that any straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points, whereas on a RiscOSM map, the shortest distance between 2 points is the great circle that passes through both points rather than a straight line. So the grid lines on a RiscOSM map are curved because that's the shortest distance between 2 points on that projection. God, it's complicated.
So if you look at the Great Circle path for flights across the Atlantic, they look very strange.
Yes, exactly. Yes. They go much closer to the North Pole than you'd think would be sensible, but that's because it's a shorter distance.
That's not. It's because the magnetic field's attracting them north.
And the other complication, of course, is that leaving aside the question of where magnetic north is, because that's just incredibly different everywhere, just looking at the coordinate systems, the coordinate system that the National Grid uses is a completely different projection from the latitude and longitude that GPS units use, because they use a completely different model of the world. So when you convert from grid to latitude and longitude, you're not just converting in a consistent coordinate system from one to the other. You're converting first from one coordinate system to the other, and then working out the projection that would give you the grid reference. So that's what makes the formula so horrendously complicated.
I think on my handheld GPS, which is knocking around here somewhere, you choose what coordinate system. I think is it WGS 84 or something like that?
That's the one they all use. And if you go to Greenwich, you'll find that 0 degrees longitude is not on the line painted on the floor, because that was the 1936 projection of where latitude and longitude was. Yes. It all gets very complicated when you look at it in detail. But the WGS 84 coordinate system is localized to each tectonic plate and follows it as it wobbles around. Oh, God, isn't it complicated? Yes, ho-ho. Yes. When they first put the satellites up for GPS positioning, they weren't sure whether to believe the scientists that they needed an atomic clock corrected for Einsteinian theory. But of course, they found they did. So they had provided for it, but they weren't sure whether to believe it or not. But yes, all of the effects Einstein described about relativity are important when you come to GPS satellites. Gosh.
So are there any other questions?
No, but I'd like to say it's been an extremely interesting presentation and quite educational.
An awful lot of work in there. Huge amount of work.
Well, I'm retired and I've got nothing else to do. I've been retired for 20 years.
There you go.
Good answer.
Hence why he needs a lot of knowledge on longitude and latitude.
Well, the thing is, it's all right. It was actually relatively easy to find it because it's all online somewhere, and all the formulae were online. It was all just a matter of downloading them and saying, "Oh, I understand why it's so complicated," and thank goodness you've done a JavaScript formula for it that I can just download. So although I am good at assembling information, but the information is all available online. If you start delving and looking for it, it's all there.
Years and years ago, this would be on BBC, in BBC B days in the 1980s. I remember having to produce a program to work out great circle distances between 2 points using a coordinate system used by radio amateurs, which I think is the Maidenhead system, which I think is still used worldwide. And that had to convert to longitude and latitude, and I later extended it to convert to national grid coordinates. That was interesting. Like every hour, I got the basic formula from somewhere else, but actually trying to make them work and trick them and find out all the quirks in the BBC basic maths It took hours. So every hour I spent programming would be like 3 or 4 trying to crash it or trick it,
Yes.
which I often did, but it worked in the end.
Yeah.
But the underlying maths, I'm afraid, completely beyond me.
But the idea, if you assume the Earth is a sphere and you have 2 points and you know the latitude and longitude of the 2 points, it's relatively straightforward coordinate geometry to work out the shortest distance on the surface of the sphere from one to the other, because all you have to do is to work out the angle the 2 points subtend at the centre of the Earth, and then you know what the length of the arc is. So it's relatively simple in latitude and longitude if you assume the Earth is a sphere, but actually it isn't.
Yeah, that was the trick because it's slightly flattened.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. All good, great fun though. It's somewhere in BBC Basic. Whether it will run under BBC Basic for Windows, I don't know.
Well, I've found BBC Basic for Windows runs pretty much most of the programs I've written for BBC Basic on RiscOS. The
Yeah.
only thing it can't do, of course, is the SWI calls,
Yeah.
because you'd need the equivalent Windows API. But other than that, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, it handles data strings differently though. If you, yeah,
Yes,
handles them in a different order and stuff. But
yes,
anyway,
yes.
not
It
that I
does.
do any programming these days.
But I tend to write data myself to a file in a format I know what it is, like CSV, and then read it in as CSV, and that works on both.
Yeah, yeah, something to be said for universal format.
Yeah, yeah.